I'm here with Steve Porter, my newfound friend with InterContinental Hotels Group, President of the Americas. Hi, Steve.
Hey, Charlie, how you doing?
Just great. You were just telling me that you found the last session very interesting. Tell me about the last session and in general what you found very interesting the last couple of days.
Yeah, the last session focused on demonstration of promises that we as an industry have made, and it started off with economic promise, jobs growth, GDP impact, and then the discussion moved quickly at the hands of some third-party viewpoint to what have we done promises toward the environment as an industry, and could we demonstrate commitment to sustainability. And what's interesting within that discussion is people go to the question of demonstrating sustainability, but there's not clear agreement on what the definition of sustainability is. We heard a great definition yesterday, and I think it's understood but perhaps not largely embraced. But my thought is, this is a continuum of travel participation. We clearly, in my role, we're in the business of asking people to travel. And the viewpoint I often hear from those who would promote the notion of sustainability is that there's an opposite end of that, which is we promote that people don't travel. And I think fundamentally that's a bad thing. It's a huge impact on jobs growth, let alone a number of the other economic benefits that would evaporate. So within the last session there was interesting debate on that particular point, and I think that's good. I think as a collective industry of hotels and cars and air carriers and restaurants, we've actually advanced the agenda farther than anyone knows, but we haven't been good about telling that story, so I think that has implications. So I found that particular session interesting and beneficial, especially as we think about shaping strategy and policy within our company, let alone across industry. So I thought that was good.
But before you move on, there's something a little deeper than that I'm not quite catching, because it gave you an aha about something that relates to what's going on in your business.
That's right.
Could you just give an example of how that relates to some things that you've been talking about, thinking about, regards to InterContinental?
Absolutely. I think the aha moment comes into play, as I said, across this continuum of being a company that's focused on sustainable issues. As a company, we've embraced energy management programs many years ago, before this became a popular topic. As a company, we embraced watershed programs many years ago, before this became a problem. Moved to biodegradable detergents. Just recently, we've shifted all of our coffee product for our Holiday Inn brand to a company who can prove that they do, in fact, grow their coffee beans in a sustainable environment. And they do it with all good practice, and they do all the appropriate and right things for their employees and the way they go to market. So now that might perhaps be a stronger reaction to the current dialogue, but I think ahead of that dialogue, the company was actually pretty well advanced. But the aha is we have not done much to harness that and tell that story from a corporate responsibility perspective. We've largely done it from an economic benefit perspective, and I think it's a matter of how we describe those actions and the benefits of those actions to the communities where we operate, to our employees, to our business partners, and how we think about that moving ahead as we grow our business.
Thank you for that. And what else? Yesterday there were lots of sessions. What little bites and pieces you walked away and made little notes about that impressed you and you were thinking about?
Yeah, a couple of things. I found the session with the ministers of tourism to be quite interesting. The reason I felt that to be the case, I think in every case, whether a minister of tourism or a prime minister from either a big country today or an emerging market, tourism is seen to be a key component of their growth plan to create economic vitality and create jobs and improve their society. I thought that was interesting. What I didn't hear, though, is to what end are they embracing that? Is there a model that they're trying to migrate to? Is there a place where they want to land that would be deemed to be successful? And then how do they determine that to be the case? Just not that anybody's right or wrong. I just think that would be interesting to know. The other thing,
so like the person who asked, give me some metrics, what would be the maximum number of people you can handle, that kind of thing, huh?
Exactly. So I thought that would be just interesting to kind of understand how they would shape that viewpoint. And then how does that intersect with policy in their local constituency? And the other thing I thought would be interesting for them to talk about is, especially if you're a minister of tourism or if you're a prime minister, tourism isn't the only thing that any country is worried about. They've got education, they've got health care, they've got other social considerations. So there's got to be a trade-off somewhere, because as you would listen to each person describe what their country was doing, it was as if that was the only place they were investing resource. I know their resources are scarce. Our resources are scarce. So I'd have loved to have heard about the tussles that go on behind the scenes and the policymakers to find, where are the trade-offs? There's got to be a pinch point in an environment of scarce resource that says, okay, we're going to allocate here because, which goes back again to what's your landing spot for success, because then that kind of tells you how you're going to allocate the resource for what period of time and how you'll measure your likelihood of getting there or not, and then you retreat and go do something different. I think perhaps we could have helped guide that discussion a bit if we'd been a bit more directive in how we asked some of the questions. So, but I just thought it was interesting, and I think it speaks volumes to the role of public enterprise being engaged with policymakers to help them shape that agenda as well. And it's a component of advocacy, and it happens largely at the grassroots level where it should, but there's also a need for advocacy at a much higher level. And I think, as business leaders, we have an accountability to engage in that dialogue also. So I think that bears fruit.
Well, I think you point out something else. There were a lot of ministers of tourism, and I think only one prime minister of a small country, that if we could, WTTC can get more prime ministers, people who are the bosses of these tourism ministers, who often don't have that much power.
I agree. I think that's a very good viewpoint. And the other thing that was missing in that particular group, would have been interesting to have some people from private industry to push back on the notion of a country that thinks they're advancing their tourism agenda through policy and ministry, but the business person would say, no, that's not the case, or yes, that is the case. Similarly, in many of the large developed countries like the United States or the United Kingdom, there really isn't a Department of Tourism or a minister that you could reach out and grab. I think it's a bit more defined in the UK, definitely not defined in the US. So we'd either get Secretary of Commerce to participate on behalf of our country or others, and it'd be interesting to get their perspective, because you think about the role of commerce and the role of tourism. Take the United States specifically. We need more travelers from abroad. We've had significant decline, at almost a crisis since 9/11 in decline, about a 19% decline. We need more workers. There's a claim of 12 million undocumented workers in the United States. Within lodging, within our company, we do not employ those individuals. Nonetheless, there are 12 million people or some number that have a job that are helping our economy advance. In lodging alone, from the standpoint of employment needs, we have 48,000 hotels in the United States. Just to stand still every year on an existing base of employment, which is just under 2 million people, just to stand still, to fill the jobs that turn over, we need 300,000 people. We are creating jobs at a clip of about 50 to 85,000 jobs a year. That's just our industry.
Out of 300,000, well, I hear another number I hear from the International Hotel and Restaurant Association based in Paris is that the shortage they estimate for the next 5 years in the hotel and restaurant industry is 12 million.
I would agree that to be a valid number. We are in discussions with different parts of the government in the United States to change our immigration policy, especially as it relates to temporary and seasonal workers. Today we have a program called H-1B and H-2B visas. Those are skill-specific H-1B, time-specific H-2B. H-2Bs largely fill jobs in agriculture and hospitality, but they're capped and they're divided into 6-month periods. And the cap isn't sufficient and the 6-month period isn't sufficient. It's about 68,000 jobs altogether, 34,000 jobs each 6 months. Those jobs are gone within the first 2 weeks, so they're all filled. As the Secretary of Commerce, the Senate, and the administration now conceive what they will likely put forward for legislation, we will have a market floating cap, and by that I mean it will float up as demand requires and it will float back down. Because the reality is, we would prefer always to populate the positions we have open with folks from the local market, but there are times when that just can't happen. So to the extent the economy requires an influx from outside the United States, there should be a mechanism to allow that. And similarly, when that isn't needed, business is going to push back on that and not avail themselves of that channel, because we would rather have the permanent employment from inside the United States. So I think that the changes as conceived are very beneficial to industry, very beneficial to the country, and I think we'll get that advance. I'm pleased with that. And again, that kind of dialogue comes about as a result of this type of dialogue. So people would come together at WTTC Summit, then participate perhaps in other advocacy groups. It informs the agenda, and then that dialogue goes forward with those other politicians, policymakers, and you actually have beneficial outcomes. A good thing.
Interesting. TIA part of that?
Yeah, yes.
Especially with the hotel guy running it?
Especially with the hotel guy running it. Yeah, the intersection of advocacy in the United States at the senior level, Travel Business Roundtable, which I sit on, and the TIA have formed a joint venture. One outcome of that is the Discover America Partnership. I happen to chair that activity, and we have three things that we're focused on. One is to fix our broken visa system, which is clearly fixed. The second is to dramatically improve the arrivals experience, especially at the 12, 14 airports that receive about 85% of the international inbound travelers. And the third is to find a meaningful number of dollars to spend outside the United States in key markets to let people know that we have in fact improved the arrivals experience. We are in fact open for business, and yes, we are a very safe and secure country, and that's a great thing for anybody that would want to come visit us. And that too has advanced to the point where we actually think we're going to see some legislation. We know it's currently in the works. So that's TIA, TBR intersection. By virtue of being a TBR board member, I also have a seat on the board of the WTTC. And I also participate with the Lodging Association on behalf of just the hotel sector. So the good news there is we've aligned our agendas. Largely the groups are speaking to the same issues, and we're seeing beneficial outcome as a result.
At InterContinental Hotels, just briefly, I know you have to run. What is it encountering growth-wise? Are you in growing, or you're kind of stabilizing? What stage are you at?
We are growing by leaps and bounds. My direct accountability, I have Canada through the tip of South America. I have 2,900 hotels open and operating today, and I have a further 1,100 in the development pipeline. So significant growth, and the lion's share of that growth is in our core business of Holiday Inn, Holiday Inn Express, and the lion's share of the geography that's important to us right now is the United States. For my direct remit, as a global company, we also have a similar growth story with 3,700 hotels around the world. That pipeline grows by another 200 to 300 when you expand for the global footprint. And our biggest focus there is the United Kingdom and China, both of which are strong today and growing very fast.
Quickly here about, we were speaking 2 nights ago about the drive-in market versus a fly-in market. I'm going back to that because you mentioned the growth being Holiday Inn and Holiday Inn Express. And WTTC satellite accounting figures show that the global $4 trillion of tourism expenditures, 80% are from the drive market, not this fly-in market.
Correct.
And what tell us about that market? Obviously, you know, you're an expert on it.
Yeah, the drive market, those are people that are driving to primary markets, as we'd think of, like New York City. They go to secondary markets, Cincinnati, Ohio. They go to tertiary markets, a place like Selma, Alabama. And they go to some never-in-your-lifetime markets that I can't even name because I know they're out there. They exist today, and people travel there. As I said, just the U.S. Example, 48,000 hotels. What's interesting about the shape of that hotel system, though, is they are distributed such that about a third of those to approaching a half of those hotels are within 100 to 200 miles of either the Canadian border or the Mexico border. So there's a lot of impact from drive-over travel, international travel from that perspective. But then within the local market, it's a very, very common thing that one gas tank away is a lot of the travel that gets done, a lot of weekend activity, families out with their children doing sporting events. That is a significant piece of our activity. And then you still have the phenomenon of the traveling salesperson who goes hotel to hotel.
Driving salesmen exists.
Absolutely, it still exists, and especially in localized geography, and they continue to consume a huge amount of room nights, especially in the mid-market, and that's one of our core customers.
Steve, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Pleasure.